Get on the ground. Hands behind your back now. The deafening command shattered the silence of my home at precisely 3 o'clock in the morning. Before my 68-year-old brain could process the intrusion, heavy, tactical boots stomped across my living room floor. Blinding beams of high-intensity flashlights sliced through the darkness, pinning me in their glare. I was forced onto the cold, unforgiving hardwood floor. The sudden impact knocked the wind out of my lungs, and a heavy knee pressed into my back as the metallic bite of handcuffs locked around my wrists. To any ordinary man, this would be a moment of absolute terror. But I am not ordinary. For 35 years, I worked as a forensic videographer, analyzing crime scenes and learning to see the cold truth hidden behind human chaos. As my cheek pressed against the floorboards, my heart rate remained remarkably steady. I did not scream, struggle, or beg. Instead, I began to observe, applying the clinical precision of my former profession to the very trap that had just sprung shut around me. Through the open front door, the theatrical performance of my daughter-in-law, Chloe, filled the night air. Her hysterical, high-pitched sobbing echoed into the house, a carefully calibrated symphony of victimhood designed to command the scene. From my position on the floor, I watched her. She was shivering, clutching a torn silk blouse over her shoulder, her face smeared with mascara and a fresh, superficial red mark blooming across her left cheek. To the responding officers, she was a broken victim. To my trained eyes, she was an amateur actress executing a deeply flawed, desperate script. He just snapped. Chloe wailed to an officer outside, her voice trembling with simulated terror. He threw me against the wall. He said he was going to make sure I never left this house alive. Please, you have to protect me. Standing behind her was my son, Julian. He looked pale, utterly paralyzed, and completely swallowed by the toxic fog of his wife's gaslighting. Seeing him stand by and let this fabrication unfold pierced my heart deeper than the handcuffs on my wrists. They wanted my house. They wanted my estate. And Chloe had decided that putting me in prison for domestic abuse was the quickest way to seize it. The arresting officer, a seasoned man with tired eyes, knelt beside me and hauled me up to a sitting position. He looked at my calm demeanor, then at my age, and I saw a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. He was duty-bound to make the arrest based on her physical state, but something about my absolute lack of panic disturbed his instincts. "Are you Arthur?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, officer," I replied, my voice carrying the quiet, unshakable resolve of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. "Your daughter-in-law claims you brutally assaulted her. What do you have to say?" I looked directly into his eyes. "Officer, I understand your protocol, and I will not resist. But look closely at her shoulder. The tear in her blouse is straight, consistent with a deliberate pull, not a struggle. The bruise on her cheek is perfectly circular, made by a thumb pressing down, not a fist. I am innocent, and you are arresting the wrong person. It is a profound and quiet agony when a father realizes his own flesh and blood has become a stranger, driven by a cold, calculating greed." Standing in my handcuffs, looking at Julian's averted eyes, my mind drifted back 6 months to the day this slow poisoning betrayal actually began. I had spent my entire life believing that unconditional love could shield a family from the worst of the world, but I was blind to the rot growing right inside my own circle. Julian had lost everything. His logistics business had collapsed into a heap of debts and broken promises, leaving him and Chloe with nothing but leased luxury cars they could no longer afford, and a mountain of eviction notices. When he knocked on my door, trembling and weeping, my paternal instincts silenced every warning sign in my head. I opened my doors and my arms, telling them my home was their home. I swallowed my pride, ignored their past arrogance, and offered them a sanctuary. believing that adversity would humble them and bring us closer together. My home is not just a building. It is a testament to 35 years of honest, grueling labor. As a forensic videographer, I spent decades documenting the darkest corners of human nature, filming crime scenes with a clinical, unblinking lens. I learned to read the subtle tells of guilt, the geometry of blood spatter, and the quiet anatomy of a lie. I knew how easily a crime scene could be staged, and how often the loudest voice in the room was the one wearing the mask of the victim. That career paid for this historic, 3-story craftsman home, a valuable piece of real estate in a rapidly gentrifying historic district. I took immense pride in my simple, quiet life, surrounded by old books, hand-carved furniture, and the steady, rhythmic ticking of my antique grandfather clock. In the beginning, Julian and Chloe played the roles of grateful, humbled guests perfectly. They washed their own dishes, spoke in hushed, respectful tones, and thanked me daily for saving them from the streets. But gratitude is a heavy burden for a parasitic mind. Within weeks, the humility faded, replaced by a subtle, creeping sense of entitlement. It started with small things, like Chloe making disgusted faces at my simple, home-cooked meals, or Julian complaining about the lack of modern smart home features in my historic house. They began to treat my sanctuary like a free luxury hotel, and me like an inconvenient, aging concierge. Then came the day I overheard Chloe on the phone in the hallway, her voice dripping with a calculating hunger that made my blood run cold. She was talking to a real estate agent, casually asking about the market value of historic homes in our neighborhood, estimating that my property could easily fetch over $2 million. From that moment on, her disdain for my simple lifestyle turned into open, aggressive hostility. She began dropping cruel hints about my age, suggesting that a man of 68 was too frail to live alone in such a large house, and that I belonged in an assisted living facility. I saw the predatory gleam in her eyes every time she looked at my walls. I realized then that I was not hosting my family. I was harboring wolves in my living room, and they were already planning how to divide up my carcass. It is a chilling thing to realize that the people sleeping under your roof are quietly trying to erase your sanity, one small lie at a time. Chloe did not launch a loud, aggressive assault on my position. She chose a far more insidious path. She began a subtle, calculated gaslighting campaign, a psychological warfare designed to make me doubt my own senses and convince my son that I was slipping into dementia. She wanted me to look fragile, unreliable, and ultimately unfit to manage my own life. If she could make me look like a confused old man, taking my valuable estate would be as simple as signing a piece of paper. The first physical piece of evidence appeared on a Tuesday morning. I spent 40 minutes searching for my house keys, only to find them tucked deep inside the freezer, resting on an ice tray. As I held the freezing metal in my hand, Chloe walked into the kitchen, wearing an expression of manufactured pity. She sighed heavily, looking over at Julian, and whispered that this was the 3rd time this week I had misplaced something vital. I did not argue. I forced my hand to tremble slightly, playing the part of a bewildered elder, but my analytical mind was fully awake. I had not opened the freezer in days. The frost on the key ring was fresh, a hasty placement designed to rattle me. Then, the psychological poison became physical. My daily heart medication, essential for managing my mild arrhythmia, suddenly tasted different. Decades of forensic work had trained me to trust my physical senses above all else. When I placed the daily pill on my tongue, there was no bitter chemical bite, only a faint, chalky sweetness. I did not swallow it. Instead, I quietly took the bottle to my basement workshop, using my old testing kit to analyze the substance. The result confirmed my darkest suspicion. My medication had been replaced with press-molded sugar pills. Chloe was not just trying to make me look crazy. She was actively trying to induce a medical emergency that would justify putting me in a care facility. The traps continued to multiply. I would find red ink markings on my kitchen calendar, detailing appointments with geriatric specialists and memory clinics that I had never made. The handwriting was a clever imitation of my own, but the stroke angles and pen pressure were completely wrong. It was a forged paper trail of my mental decline. Outside our walls, Chloe began her campaign of public whispers. From my study window, I watched her corner my lifelong neighbors, whispering with a hand pressed to her chest, shaking her head in theatrical sorrow. She was sowing the seeds of my insanity in the community, preparing them for the day I would be hauled away. The ultimate betrayal occurred late one evening. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, watching Chloe press a stack of legal documents into Julian's hands. They were power of attorney papers. She hissed at him, telling him that my mind was completely gone and that signing the papers was the only way to save our family. Julian looked at the floor, his silence a crushing weight in my chest, but he did not refuse her. They believed their gaslighting was working because I let them see a trembling, forgetful father. But beneath my quiet facade, my tactical forensic mind was charting every move, preparing for the moment I would strike back. To survive a predator, you must first let them believe you are entirely helpless. Watching my own son hold those power of attorney papers, his silence consenting to my destruction, was the moment my paternal grief hardened into cold, forensic resolve. They had crossed a line from greed into physical endangerment, and I knew that if I did not act with absolute precision, they would lock me away in a padded cell and strip me of everything I had spent my life building. I refused to be a victim in my own home. My 35 years of documenting crime scenes had taught me one fundamental truth. Lies are fragile, temporary structures, but high-definition video is absolute, eternal, and completely merciless. I needed an airtight, irrefutable record of their conspiracy, the kind of evidence that no slick lawyer could twist and no sympathetic jury could ignore. Drawing on my decades of professional contacts, I quietly bypassed local stores and ordered a state-of-the-art, military-grade microcamera. This was no ordinary consumer nanny cam. It was a low-light, high-definition pinhole lens designed for covert surveillance, equipped with thermal sensors and a highly sensitive directional microphone. I configured the system to bypass my home's local network entirely, routing the signal through an encrypted cellular uplink that streamed directly to a secure, password-protected cloud server. Even if Chloe suspected something and ripped the house apart looking for a recording device, the evidence would already be safely stored miles away, entirely out of her reach. The choice of where to place this silent sentinel was obvious. In the center of my living room stood my grandfather clock, a towering, hand-carved mahogany masterpiece that had belonged to my own father. Its steady, rhythmic ticking had been the heartbeat of this house for generations. I spent hours in my basement workshop, meticulously modifying the clock's ornate pendulum chamber. Using my forensic tools, I drilled a microscopic aperture through a knot in the dark wood filigree, a hole no larger than the head of a sewing needle. I mounted the microcamera behind this tiny opening, carefully aligning the lens to capture a panoramic view of the entire living room, from the front door to the kitchen hallway. I wired the power source directly into the clock's internal mechanical housing, ensuring the camera would run indefinitely without a single exposed wire. When I finished, the clock looked completely untouched, its brass pendulum swinging back and forth, masking any microscopic hum from the transmitter with its deep, comforting tick. It did not take long for the trap to spring. 2 nights later, sitting in the dark of my basement workshop with my tablet, I watched the live feed as Chloe stood in the living room, speaking in hushed, urgent tones on her phone. Her accomplice on the other end was a man, a ruthless voice advising her on how to escalate the situation. I listened with a chilling detachment as Chloe outlined her final, desperate plan. She explained that the gaslighting was taking too long and that they needed a decisive blow. She told the voice on the line that she would trigger a physical confrontation, mark her own face, and call the police to claim I had brutally assaulted her. She laughed, a cold, empty sound that echoed through my headphones, boasting that the police would always believe a bruised young woman over a confused, trembling old man. She was right about the police, but she was catastrophically wrong about me.
The silent sentinel had captured every word, every gesture, and every dark detail of her conspiracy, preserving the truth in pristine high definition, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy her. There is a chilling, absolute stillness that settles over a home right before it is desecrated by a monstrous lie. I stood in the dim light of my hallway, feeling the heavy weight of Margaret's memory all around me, knowing that the woman my son had brought into my sanctuary was about to tear it all down. Chloe walked into the living room, her footsteps deliberate, her eyes burning with a desperate predatory hunger. She did not want a conversation. She wanted a war, and she had decided that tonight was the night she would win it. In her hands, she held Margaret's antique porcelain teapot, a fragile, hand-painted heirloom that my late wife had cherished. It was the physical anchor to a lifetime of love. Chloe looked at me, a cruel, mocking smirk on her lips, and raised the teapot high. She wanted me to lunge at her. She wanted me to grab her wrists, to scream, to give her the physical struggle she needed to justify her narrative. When I did not move, she deliberately let go, watching it shatter into 1,000 pieces on the floor. The crash echoed like a gunshot. She then threw a teacup directly at my feet, the sharp shards slicing the air. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, nor did I let anger consume me. Instead, I looked at her with profound, quiet pity. She was a hollow shell, driven by a madness of greed. Without saying a word, I turned my back on her, stepped over the broken porcelain, and walked calmly to my bedroom. I closed the heavy oak door and turned the deadbolt, sealing myself inside. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the darkness of the room enveloping me, and pulled up the live stream on my tablet. The high-definition feed from the grandfather clock was crystal clear, capturing the entire living room in agonizing detail.
What I witnessed next was a masterclass in psychological depravity, a chilling performance that I analyzed with the cold, clinical detachment of my forensic training. Chloe did not stop when I left. She stood alone, her face twisting into a cold, calculating mask of self-destruction. With terrifying precision, she constructed her crime scene. I watched her grip her own arm, squeezing her flesh with her fingers, applying enough pressure to guarantee deep bruises by morning. She did not cry out. Her expression was blank as she systematically harmed herself. She then pressed her thumb hard into her cheek, twisting it to mimic the blunt force of a strike. Next, she grabbed her silk blouse, tearing the fabric down her shoulder with a violent yank. She threw herself against the wall, scraping her shoulder against the plaster. She overturned a wooden chair, swept books off the table, and scattered her purse across the floor. Finally, she dialed 911. The moment the dispatcher answered, her entire demeanor transformed. She began to shriek, a hysterical wail of terror that echoed through the walls. She sobbed that her father-in-law had lost his mind, that I was assaulting her, and that she was hiding in fear for her life. I watched her on my screen, screaming into the phone while her eyes remained completely cold, scanning the ruined room to ensure her masterpiece of lies was perfect. I sat in the dark, my heart beating in a steady, rhythmic cadence, waiting for the sirens. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Officer Davis gripped my arm, preparing to lead me out of the only home I had ever loved. Outside, Chloe's theatrical wails reached a fever pitch, a calculated performance designed to draw the neighbors to their windows and seal my social ruin. She wanted the world to see me as a broken, violent old man. But as I stood there, looking at my son Julian, who still refused to meet my eyes, I felt no fear, only a profound, freezing clarity. My entire career had prepared me for this exact moment. Lies are loud, chaotic, and desperate, but the truth is quiet, patient, and absolute. I stopped walking, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. Officer Davis tugged gently on my arm, but I did not budge. I looked him directly in the eyes, my voice steady, carrying the calm authority of a man who had spent 35 years working alongside law enforcement. "Officer, before you take me past that threshold, you are legally obligated to secure the active evidence on this scene," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Under the State Penal Code for evidence preservation, I am formally notifying you of active, high-definition electronic surveillance capturing the last 24 hours in this very room." I pointed my chin toward the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner. Behind the carved wooden filigree at eye level is a military-grade pinhole lens. The camera has recorded everything that transpired tonight in pristine detail, including the exact moment those injuries were created. Officer Davis stared at me, his seasoned eyes narrowing. He had already shown subtle signs of skepticism toward Chloe's overly dramatic display, noting how her clean, straight tears and superficial injuries did not align with a violent struggle. My absolute calm contrasted sharply with her hysteria. He signaled his partner to keep Chloe and Julian at the doorway, then walked slowly over to the towering mahogany clock. He leaned in, pulling out a small tactical flashlight. The beam illuminated the microscopic aperture I had meticulously drilled. With practiced care, he opened the side panel of the clock, locating the secure housing of the micro camera. He ejected the high-capacity memory card, his expression hardening as he realized my warning was entirely real. He did not leave the house. Instead, he pulled out his department-issued tablet, inserting the card into the reader. I stood in my handcuffs, watching his face. Chloe, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, stepped back into the living room, her fake tears suddenly drying as she tried to see what the officer was doing. Julian followed her, his face pale with a sudden, creeping dread. The silence in the room became suffocating, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Officer Davis pressed play. The high-definition footage was merciless. On the screen, Chloe's voice echoed clearly, outlining her plan to frame me. The video showed her breaking the porcelain teapot, tearing her own blouse, and violently squeezing her own arms to create the very bruises she had just shown the officers. It showed her screaming into her phone, while her eyes remained completely cold and calculating. The room fell dead silent as the playback continued. Chloe's face drained of color, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. The power dynamic of the entire room had shattered in a single, utterly devastating instant. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs releasing from my wrists was the loudest sound in the room, a sharp punctuation mark ending the nightmare they had so carefully constructed. Officer Davis did not say a word to me as he took the steel cuffs and stepped toward Chloe. The sudden, violent shift in her expression, from smug confidence to sheer terror, was a sight I would never forget. In a matter of seconds, the handcuffs were slapped onto her wrists. She began to scream, a high-pitched, panicked shriek that lacked any of the practiced theatricality of her earlier performance. She thrashed against the officer's grip, her voice cracking as she begged Julian to do something, to explain, to lie, to save her from the inescapable trap she had built with her own hands. But Julian stood completely paralyzed, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. The realization of what they had done, and what they had lost seemed to crush his chest. He was looking at the wreckage of his greed, realizing that my estate, the safety net he had taken for granted, and the father who had loved him unconditionally were all gone. Slowly, his legs buckled and he fell to his knees on the hardwood floor right next to the shattered pieces of his mother's teapot. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked up at me, begging me to understand that he had been manipulated, that he was deeply sorry. I looked down at my only son, feeling a profound, aching sorrow that went far deeper than any anger. I did not raise my voice. When I spoke, my words carried the quiet, heavy weight of 35 years of documenting human tragedy and the timeless authority of a father whose trust had been completely shattered. "Julian," I said, my voice steady and cold. "A father's love is a sanctuary, not a resource to be mined when the world gets cold. Honor is not something you can buy with a stolen inheritance, and legacy is not measured in the square footage of a historic house, but in the integrity of the blood that flows through your veins. You traded your mother's memory, your father's life, and your own soul for the hollow promises of a predator. By standing silent while she tried to destroy me, you broke the sanctity of our blood. You are no longer my son." I stood tall and told them to get out of my house. I legally evicted them on the spot, telling the officers they were no longer welcome under my roof. Officer Davis nodded grimly, guiding a screaming Chloe out the door. Julian dragged himself off the floor, walking out behind them like a ghost. I stood at the threshold, watching the red and blue emergency lights paint the trees as the police cruisers drove away, taking the chaos with them. I closed the heavy oak door, turning the deadbolt with a slow, deliberate click. The silence that filled my home was no longer suffocating. It was clean and deeply restorative. I sat down in my favorite armchair, listening to the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and finally reclaimed my peace, my dignity, and my home.